This is Paul Pearson, host of Star Time, and when I'm not translating the lyrics of Boogie Oogie Oogie for bored Europeans, I'm listening to Rainier Avenue Radio World.
My name is Josephine, and I live in Renton, Washington. Even after getting COVID in 2020, I still did not want to have anything to do with the vaccination. There was much fear in the African American community. Before you do anything, pray. And make sure that you're praying to get the answer and not praying to get your answer. Reconsider, asking yourself why you are hesitant about getting it. To learn more, please visit weconsiderwa.org.
Mga kaibigan, ito po si Kuya Bert Kawili.
And this is Miles Salvador from Australia.
And I'm Norb Kawili, also known as Norbcam.
Kung gusto niyo po ang latest news and events from the Philippines at yung local Filipino community, Phil-Am Radio po.
We play Filipino music and interview guests from all around the world.
And I'll keep you updated on the latest Seahawks and sports news.
Kaya always tune in, Phil-Am Radio every Tuesday, 1 to 2:30 p.m. Pacific Time on Rainier Avenue Radio.world.
And in YouTube and Facebook. Salamat po.
This is your Rainier Avenue Radio.world community update on Seattle City Lights Utility Discount Program application. If you are impacted by COVID-19, otherwise known as the coronavirus, access the utility discount application online at seattle.gov/UDP for utility discount program, or call 206-684-3000. That's seattle.gov/UDP or 206-684-3000.
On Rainier Avenue Radio.world, look for the Change Your Food, Change Your Life show. I'm Dennis Weaver, your good food guide and host, helping you to feel good and look good, and who wouldn't want some of that? All that and more from the Change Your Food, Change Your Life show on Rainier Avenue Radio.world. Stories, songs, and guests. Begin living the organic good food life, and the rest of your life just may be the best of your life. Oh, what's up, baby? To your help.
Are you a small business owner in Seattle who was impacted by COVID-19? The Seattle Office of Economic Development is investing $8 million to connect small businesses to operating capital. The Small Business Capital Access Program will lower the cost of Washington State Small Business Flex Fund loans by paying down 25% of the loan principal. Eligible small businesses can borrow up to $150,000 with a 4% interest rate to cover expenses like payroll, rent, utilities, and supplies.
You're listening to Rainier Avenue Radio.world.
You're listening to Heartbeat Radio. I'm your host, Cindi Bright. Heartbeat Radio is a conversation aimed to take the pulse of corporate America. Opportunities for people of color, we're getting lost in the shuffle of change. I'm that provocateur of change. The hearts of corporate America are addressed. Access and opportunities will be accelerated for all people. Through Heartbeat Radio, you will gain a deeper understanding of what is necessary for change. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Heartbeat Radio and podcast. It's Wednesday evening. Excited to have our show and our guest tonight. I'm by myself this evening as Joy is still traveling, so I think I can do this. I did it for 3 years before I brought her on, so I'm going to do my best to speak with our guest that we have on this evening. Before I bring her in, a couple things I'll say. You all watch. First off, thank you all who joined last week for celebrating my 150th episode. It was kind of a big deal, so thank you all for being there. You know that my focus has and continues to be on advancing and hearing the voice of Black women. And when I talk with folks who are in corporate America, having parity for access for opportunities for Black people, and particularly Black women, is important. It's a hot topic out now, where companies are supposedly having these conversations. I wanted to bring on somebody who has actually gotten to the top ranks of corporate America in her career. She's a phenomenal woman. I actually had to pull up her bio in front of me because she's accomplished so much. So we're excited to have her tonight. She is the founder of Boggs Media. So that's her media company that manages. She is a musician. When she was scheduled on the last time, something like the Grammys, I think, got crossed paths with our show. So she was there. So musician, speaker. She's a lawyer by training. She's the former general counsel. That's the top lawyer in corporate America in Starbucks. And so we are so thrilled to have her on tonight to have a conversation about what it means to be Black in the boardroom. So let's welcome Paula Boggs on to Heartbeat Radio and Podcast this evening.
Hi, Cindy. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing great. It's good to be here.
Yeah, thank you for joining and coming on. This is a rarity and a treat to have you here and somebody who can actually speak to our community about, I'll say, diversity, or we can talk about equity, but you have so much that you have accomplished. We want to hear about you, and we want to have a conversation with you about, you told me some stories, and I pulled out all my notes from last time I talked to you about some of the things that you had shared with me, which are powerful, and why we aim to advance Black women into the boardroom. So I would love to turn it over to you and just let you introduce yourself to our audience and talk a little bit about yourself, your background, why you do what you do, and then we can get into the boardroom kind of conversation.
Sure. Yeah, I'm happy to do it. And, I don't want to be too much of a talking head. So I will spend a few moments sharing with your audience who I am. And then, let's get into it. So I am, for those of you who are listening, I'm one of these people who is in her third chapter of career. And I guess technically there was a fourth chapter before I became an adult, but this is my third chapter as an adult, at least in terms of career. So yeah, who is Paula Boggs? Well, I have been, my family has been in the United States for over 200 years. And so I am the progeny of slaves on both sides of my family. And like a lot of African Americans, the story I like to share is across that 200 plus year period, each generation has done at least a little better than the generation that came before. And that is certainly my story. I am the child of educators. My dad was the first PhD in zoology at Howard University, historically Black college. My mother, also a graduate of Howard, became an educator. And so I had the good fortune of starting life on that track. And indeed, as a little kid, we moved from Washington, D.C. to segregated Virginia. And while there, I was the child of a professor at historically Black Virginia State, then college, now Virginia State University. And one of the most, I think, important things about me and that time of my life is this. Very early on, I learned a couple things that have animated the rest of my life. One is because I was the child of college educated people, and we lived, at least for a time, literally on a college campus, my idea of what it means to be Black was formed by my surroundings, which were everyone I knew. All the kids I knew were Black kids I knew were like me, the children of highly educated people, and I knew their parents. And so for me, very early on, as I was forging my own identity as a Black person, that's what it meant to me. Being Black meant being excellent and academically gifted. Those were attributes of African Americans that I internalized very early in my life. A second lesson I learned was a couple different flavors of diversity, equity, and inclusion that continue to serve me well. My dad was Catholic. My mom was African Methodist Episcopal, and what that meant for me was I toggled from Sunday to Sunday between two radically different flavors of Christianity, and learned how to navigate that. Related to that is I was a minority within a minority because only 10% of African Americans are Roman Catholic. And so all of that was the setting for me when I attended Catholic school as the only Black girl for several years in my elementary school at a place that at the time was the only integrated school in segregated Petersburg, Virginia. And so those experiences really began to forge my sense of self and race in America. And then something really radical happened, which was my folks split up. And with that, my mom took herself and her 4 children, me being the oldest, out of the segregated South, out of the United States and to Europe. And with that, for the first time in my life, I lived in a fully integrated situation, which was I was living in a U.S. military community in Europe where my mom taught the children of military personnel. And in addition to that, I was an American on somebody else's soil. All of that, I think, taught me different things about navigating this whole thing called race in the United States. And so when I came back for college and whatnot, I think I was equipped with tools that elude many African Americans in the United States of America. Since returning, and for the past, let's say 40 years, I've been on a journey that has included stints in the U.S. military. I spent about 30 years, give or take, as a lawyer. And for the past 10 years, I've been exclusively in the creative arts. And so that's who I am in a nutshell. And I'll let Cindi continue to ask me questions.
Yeah, quite a background. I was a couple of the things you said that struck me. One was about your ability, how you learned how to toggle. And so when you were sharing about the different faith aspects of your family, and I wonder how that played into your rise in corporate America, because one could argue that the ability to toggle, you've been in different communities, you've been in different countries, and so learning how to navigate those. Can you talk to us about how you were able to rise to a top job in the boardroom of a major Fortune 100 company?
Yes. So, I think one of the huge takeaways for me from having one parent be Roman Catholic and one parent being a member of the African Methodist Episcopal Church was when I was in whichever environment that was, I was all in. I wasn't pretending. I developed a sense of self that said, when I'm here, this is me. And it is authentically me. And when I'm there, this is me. And I'm authentically me. And so I think, some of those things that, I didn't hyper analyze it. It just became the rhythm of my childhood have really served me well, coupled with when I lived in Europe between ages 13 and 18, I attended 3 different schools in 2 different countries in 5 years. And that really, those facts really taught me how to read a culture very quickly and learn how to literally not be the new kid. And so I think those experiences in childhood really enabled me to, whether the job was the Army General Counsel's office in the Pentagon or the Reagan White House, where, I was the only Black professional woman I remember the whole time I was working there, or, at the U.S. Attorney's Office as a federal prosecutor, when there was a period of time when I was the only Black female prosecutor across, I think, 10 plus states. Learning, okay, what are the norms? What are the cultural norms in this place? And how do I not be the new kid? How do I not be, the person who sticks out? Now, mind you, if I'm a Black woman and everybody else in my work environment is a white male, I'm going to stand out. So the skill set I think I learned as a middle schooler and high schooler was active listening, acute observation. Yeah, I'm a Black woman and they're all white guys, but is there anything we have in common? And if so, how can I capitalize on that? And a perfect example of that is when I worked in the Reagan White House, when I was in the military. There, as I said, there were no Black professional women in the Reagan White House that I remember. And most of the people I worked with were, as you might imagine, in the Reagan White House, white male, including my boss. And facially, there was really nothing in common between my middle-aged white boss and me. But what we discovered after a relatively short period of time was we were both Roman Catholic. And what that meant was there were things about my upbringing that were identical or close enough to his upbringing. And Cindi, whether it's corporate America or anywhere else, when you're talking about mentoring, most people gravitate towards people who remind them of themselves, right? And so, if you're in an environment like I was in the Reagan White House, facially, I'm not going to remind anybody in a position of power of their younger self. But if you start, sharing, these about us and, what we were experiencing, my experience was like that too. Before you know it, or at least in my experience, these common threads emerge. And guess what? In the case of my relationship with my boss, he became not only a mentor to me, but a sponsor of me. And when I think about the first 10 years of my legal career, at every major sort of decision point in that journey, he was there for me. And that happens, I think, in part because people connect some way with each other that leads to the mentor in that relationship seeing something in you that reminds them of their younger slash less experienced self.
As you're talking and describing what your experience has been when I'm going to paraphrase some things, when you have been embraced. So folks have, the men that you're describing have embraced who you are, mentored you along. You have been able to show up authentically in the workplace. As you describe that has not been the experience of many Black women. And so many Black women, maybe my question is, what have you seen what I'm describing in terms of the disconnect or the lack of mentorship or the lack of support inside of organizations to embrace who they are? I mean, that's the first question. And then now we're in a social, racial outcry in corporate America over the lack of embracing of people who are different and people who and so how do you reconcile that, and what advice do you have for Black women that don't have those people who take them under the wings and help them move along?
Yeah, and not only have I seen it, I've had a first row seat to it. And it can happen even with people who have had maybe not all of the experiences I've had, the integrative experiences I've had, but nonetheless have been in settings before I got to meet them where some of the things that are part of my story were part of theirs. And specifically, I'm thinking about the law firm I worked at after several years in government. Well, I was the first Black female partner in the history of that law firm. But shortly after I got there, the law firm hired 2 Black associates. One was male and one was female. The female Black associate was a West Point graduate. Okay, so so we were, we were we were bonded by both being Black women, but we were also bonded by both being veterans, right? And I know there's no doubt in my mind to have graduated from West Point meant she had to navigate a lot of stuff. So she wasn't coming into the law firm as somebody who had never had the experience of needing to sort of navigate, if you will, to get things done. And the Black man had graduated from, I can't remember where he had gone to law school, but his undergraduate degree was from MIT. And he was either chemical engineering or electrical engineering. So, so neither of these people were coming to this law firm as, virgins, if you will, and the need to navigate highly competitive situations where they were clearly in the minority, right? However, within 6 months of my leaving that firm for something else, those 2 people had left too. And I attribute that to people need champions, and I honestly, Cindi, didn't even appreciate until they left how much of a champion I was for them, and it was perhaps as much the fact that I was just there, that there was someone who they could see who had, quote, made it, if you will, at least in their eyes, right? And then my absence, right, meant that they were now in a very different petri dish. And so, what that taught me, and I never forgot that lesson, is representation matters. It really does matter. Even if, as was the case at Starbucks, there were people I never met. There were people in the company I never met. And yet the fact that I was there was meaningful to them. It gave them an anchor at a place where anchors were hard to come by, right? And so all of that teaches me that leadership matters, and I've had the good fortune of being a leader in corporate America, but even beyond leadership, their representation matters. Hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah. Yes, it does. I captured your 2 words of championing for people and navigating for people. And I think that whole area, it's the overused term that continues to be used as mentorship, but no sponsorship. And so that language has become much more performative in nature, in terms of leaders taking people off of succession plans who are highly capable, highly talented, and actually tangibly getting them into spaces of power and influence. Before I jump into that topic, because we do a station identification here in another minute, I'm going to take the break now and come back and pick back up on that particular area. So you're listening to Rainier Avenue Radio. This is Cindi Bright at Heartbeat. We'll be back in just a couple minutes.
Half that up in Saks, I favor black businesses. Assuming I'm rooting for everybody that's black. Yeah. Yeah. Assuming I'm rooting for everybody that's black. Yo.
Rainier Avenue Radio.
Feel uneasy on your feet? Need assistance to walk? Do you use a wheelchair and want to stand more? What if you could stand stronger and feel steadier on your feet? What would this mean for your daily life and those closest to you? Join our dance-based walking program to improve balance, coordination, strength, and stamina. Wednesdays, May 18th to June 22nd at 2 p.m. at the iconic Columbia City Theater in partnership with Rainier Avenue Radio and Hugs That Empower nonprofit. Walkers, wheelchairs, and canes, welcome. If you can stand and bear weight for even just 5 seconds, come dance to walk with Tango Stride.
Rainier Avenue Radio presents All Music, All Day Saturday. Music, all day Saturday. This is Edwin Bailey, Bulldog Blue, Jazz from the Cabinets.
That's right. It's time once again for Jazz from the Cabinets with Big Poppy.
Start Time.
Thanks for tuning in. My name is Paul Pierce. This is Start Time.
Saturdays, all music, all day. Reggae Hour, K-Fox Night.
Looking for the perfect beat? Yeah, it's the beat of the box.
Fresh Juice with D-Money in there.
Myself, D-Money.
Pint-sized Patron.
Taylor Hart. This is Vincia, the Northwest Rap Gang.
DJ Medina, Chad Cheddar, Northwest Rap Gang.
Sergio Lacour's Love Line.
It's Sergio's Love Lines with Sergio Lacour. Go to the phone line. Tell her who we
Sea Monster Radio. Mo Jams is your jam.
We're live. Welcome to Mo Jam Mondays. This is KZ of KZ Music Media. Caller Goddess for Mo Jam Mondays.
Just my opinion. God is inspiration all day and all night. Saturdays on Rainier Avenue Radio.
Tune in to Real Estate and Money every Tuesday afternoon from 2:30 to 3 here on Rainier Avenue Radio.world. Join your hosts Violetta Strash with John L. Scott Kent North and Tina Lombard with Guaranteed Rate Affinity. They'll help you navigate the waters of our volatile real estate market and offer you some guidance on how to make your hard-earned money work to make your dreams come true. Learn about current trends, get tips on financial matters, and have fun, interactive discussions about your home inside and out. That's Real Estate and Money.
Seattle band The Night Cry will be volunteering at the West Seattle Junction Beautification Project on Saturday, May 21st from noon to 2 p.m. as part of One Seattle Day of Service.
Rainier Avenue Radio.world is your 24/7 digital media hub. Tune in at Rainier Avenue Radio.world. Also find us on Facebook, Twitter, and TuneIn apps.
Set up the sacks, our favorite black businesses. Assuming I'm rooting for everybody that's black. Yeah. Yeah. Assuming I'm rooting for everybody that's black. Yo.
Welcome back to Heartbeat Radio and Podcast. I'm your host, Cindi Bright. We have the phenomenal Paula Boggs, media mogul, entrepreneur, corporate general counsel, Army veteran. Let me just, the list goes on. So we're so grateful to have her on here talking to us and sharing her stories with us about her rise in corporate America and the type of setups that helped her to be successful. So let's bring Paula back in. I want to pick back up, Paula, because last time you and I talked, so before the break, we were talking about navigating people and championing them. And I remembered a story you told me one time, which is a powerful depiction of this exact issue of championing for somebody. It was a story about a woman in your boardroom, and one of the executives made an assumption about her. And I want to say, was she falling asleep, or there was something that had happened?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I'm happy to share that story. So, the setting at our company, which happens in corporate America, you have a CEO that's left, you have a new CEO, and in our case, it was the founder, and you have this period where people are, trying to prove themselves to, the new sheriff, the new guy in this case. And so that was the context of the story I'm about to share. So it is a meeting of the CEO and his direct reports. I am at the time I was certainly the only African American in the room, I believe, and I'm pretty sure I was the only woman in the room too. But that was the context for the story. So in a period of people trying to prove themselves, one of my peers said something to the effect, people are just so lazy these days, and we've got to take care of it. In fact, I just saw a woman who was asleep on the couch in the 8th floor. And the 8th floor was where most of the senior executives, or many of the senior executives, worked. The CEO was on the 8th floor. And so the statement is made about a woman who is asleep on the couch outside the boardroom. I don't know who the woman is, but in a split second, I had to make a decision, because I could have let it go. It was one of these so-called casual comments before the business of the day was being discussed in earnest. But I made another decision. I made the decision to speak up. And what I said was calmly, you know nothing about this woman. You don't know if she's been up for the past 72 hours trying to finish a project. You don't know if she is recovering from chemotherapy. You don't know if she was dealing with a sick child or parent. You don't know. With that, there was this really awkward silence. Okay. And I'm actually not sure how long it lasted, but likely only a couple seconds before, in a very impatient tone, the CEO said, let's move on. Let's move on. And we did. And what I think I shared with you, Cindy, is, I have no way of knowing whether a comment of that sort happened again out of the mouths of any of the people who were in the room that day. But I do know this. No one in that room ever made a comment of that nature when I was present from that moment forward.
That story is so powerful, Paula. I mean, when you told it to me, the reason why it stuck with me so is because it illustrates or it mirrors what the lives of women are, and the judgment and assumptions that are made about folks with no context in the name of the game of, I can't remember how the words you use, but folks trying to prove themselves.
Yeah.
And so the default behavior becomes to sell her out in order for him to rise.
Mm-hmm.
So that has been my experience watching how these issues play themselves out, which is why we're so fascinated and thrilled to have you here, because it's not normal that it's just not normal that, a Black woman would get into that room and then you have to be the person to address the issue, albeit it was the way that you managed it to just making the comments created a level of discomfort so much that they wanted to move on. And now here we are in today's world. I think that was several years ago when that happened.
It sure was.
Yeah. And here we are in today's world where the CEO now is struggling to decide what he or she now must start to say or speak about inside of organizations because of the term I'll use is organizational justice is now being required or demanded by people, the workers. And so as we think about that whole topic, right, of the movement that's happening across this country, there are a lot of things happening that you see indicators that the C-suite is not either listening or prepared for the moments that we're in right now, right? We're in unionization, we're in racial reckoning. We have a lot of, the world has a lot of demand on corporate America. So I'm curious to your thoughts about where we are now, because you've been out for a hot minute of sitting in that boardroom. And so, and I want to get to that, but what are your thoughts about where we are, where corporate America is now as a state of progressing women into senior leadership roles, progressing, BIPOC people into more senior level roles and getting them ready and championing them to get into some of these positions of power. What do you think about what's happening now?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of energy around these issues. Some of it is real, some of it is not. And sometimes I find, you have in corporate America, I will say, and how this plays out will vary from industry to industry and sometimes from company to company within an industry. But, you have the marginalized groups and those who are not marginalized, right? And, one of the perversions is playing marginalized groups off each other, right? So, if to champion African Americans must somehow necessarily mean that you are less less enthusiastic about championing women, or you're not championing the LGBTQIA community with the same energy perhaps you did before George Floyd's murder, and that's nonsense. It all matters. It really, there's some people like me who, are members of all of those groups, right? And so I think, one of the things that I try to express, either when I'm in the boardroom or speaking, because I speak with a number of different groups, and some are law firms, some are Fortune 500 companies, some are startups, some are college campuses, right? And what I say about that is, no, it all matters. It really all matters. A, and B, though, because I try to give people hope, Cindi, right? And so what I also say is, if we're talking about race, and we're specifically talking about African Americans, what I say is, don't make this Mount Everest. Okay? Because if you make this Mount Everest, no one will climb it. Okay? Very few people are going to even attempt to climb Mount Everest, and we need people to move forward, right? And so what I try to encourage people, particularly because some of the groups I address are people where the preponderance of people in the room are technical people or scientific people or left brain people, right? And what I say to those people is, look, if you're a scientist, the expectation is you will fail a lot. You will fail a lot before you move forward. If you get to move forward without failing a lot, that is so exceptional, because the baseline in science is failure, right? And so and so it is. You don't give up just because you fail. You try something else, and you try to learn, right, from the failures, right? And so it is here. I specifically said this to a white 40-something sort of engineer oriented CEO who said something, I'm paraphrasing, but said something to the effect, look, I want to do the right thing, but I'm afraid. I feel like I'm walking on eggshells. I feel as if I'm going to do the wrong thing or say the wrong thing. And so what can you tell me? What can you say to somebody like me? And that was my response. My response was, first, thank you for being here, because you're the CEO. So you're showing by being here that you care about this topic, A. B, thank you for asking the question, because it demonstrates vulnerability. It demonstrates that you recognize you don't know it all and you want to learn, right? And then 3 is what I said about Mount Everest and about, being, being in a mindset of, I'm not always going to get it right. Now, Cindi, I believe not just white people should have that mindset sometimes. When people are trying, if you slap them upside the head, 100 times, they're going to stop trying, right? And so I urge, my fellow African Americans, and BIPOC communities to stay engaged too, because we need each other that way to move, to move the ship. And we need to move the ship, because the status quo is not sustainable in my view.
Yeah, it was interesting listening to you describe that. I relate to some of the things you're saying about there is kind of this balance of push and pull, right? Push when you need, I don't know if you've heard, I'm going to just go off topic for just a quick second, but I was listening last week to this podcast by the Delta Airlines CEO who did a conversation about this, and he was interviewed by a Harvard Black man who asked him some really good questions. And it was interesting for me to listen, because the way that I was listening to that conversation was from my old lens of former HR director, and listening to, I could pick out of what he was saying which statements were corporate communications folks infused into him answering questions, and so there's this fine line. I think it's what you're talking about, between the top ranks of a business who see and know and demand change in their organizations. And then there's the rub between how does that happen, and then how does that filter down and help create longer term powerful solutions on these topics. And so that's what the wrestling is going on right now. The rub between we have to say something, and we've gone dead quiet post George Floyd now. So they're kind of riding the waves right now to try to stay, keep their heads above water, but not get caught with their pants down, so to speak, right? So it's just, listening to that Delta CEO, how he was navigating that conversation. And I thought one of the most powerful questions that he was asked that I'm going to ask you, he asked, what tangibly, like he said, look, we've been talking about this for a long time, corporate America. People like, you, Paula, I spent 30 years inside of corporate America. 15 years of my career was executive levels. We've been talking about this for a long time. And so what tangibles do you feel, or would you recommend the boardroom or organizations do right now, even if it's one thing? What's one thing you tangibly that you believe that they should do to help progress this whole topic of equity, earning power? That all comes from the ability to grow and rise. What one thing do you think you would suggest that they do?
Yeah, I think one of the things that can be done is to, this is my term, de-ghettoize diversity, equity, and inclusion, right?
I couldn't do that one.
Because the way we talk about, or not all of us, but too often we talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion as if it is something. I mean, if I'm a 30-something white guy, then my default is going to be diversity, equity, and inclusion is not about me. It's about somebody else. It's about those people, or whoever those people are in his environment. And so that is that and so the response to that is checking out, right? It's like, not me, I don't benefit from it, blah blah blah. So what I was able to do in my 10 years at Starbucks was reimagine diversity, equity, and inclusion so that everybody was invited to not only have but share his or her DEI story, right? And we did a number of things to sort of put meat on that bone. And I will tell you this. So I left Starbucks 10 years ago. Last week or the week before, I had a reunion of sorts with one of the guys who had worked for me for all 10 years at Starbucks. And I would say he's now 50 and he's a white guy. What he said to me was this. He said, Paula, you made diversity, equity, and inclusion about me. And how did that happen? Right? So I had created this forum in an effort to demystify diversity, equity, and inclusion, to carve out a part of our monthly staff meeting so that anyone who wanted to could share their diversity, equity, inclusion story, right? And so this one meeting, a Japanese American man shared his in Portland, and actually a woman who was born in Spain and immigrated to the United States shared her story about how people would presume she was less intelligent than she was because English was not her first language, right? And so these two people had shared their stories, and Steve had absorbed this. So after the meeting, I had a practice of sort of walking the halls, and I came by his office, and he was emotional, and I said, Steve, what's going on? And he said, I don't have a diversity story. I'm just, a white guy who grew up on a chicken farm in, rural New Jersey. And I said, well, Steve, how many chicken farmers are in law and corporate affairs? And he looked at me, and he actually started crying. So that happened 15 years ago. Last week, he said, Paula, when you said to me, that was one of the most eye-opening moments in my life about diversity, equity, inclusion, because it for the first time, it had included him, right? And I think people need that. They need a way to embrace these goals that in a way that lifts all boats, if you will. right? And it's one of the reasons why, not the first chair, but the second and third chairs of our department DEI committee were white guys, because I wanted them to have skin in the game, and that there was the symbolism of it, but there was also the doing the work. What we were doing in holding suppliers accountable, who were we hiring and championing within the organization, and all of that stuff, right? But it starts, in my view, with not, there's never going to be 100% buy-in. But if you can get the preponderance of people, regardless of their race, gender, what have you, buy in, then you're gonna have an organization over time that not only values DEI, but excels because of it.
It's an interesting way that you answered that from my perspective. The de-ghettoizing, which I am definitely stealing from you. But your point is well taken. Let me comment about that a little bit, because DEI in organizations has rarely ever been invested in. So some companies had chief diversity officers, some didn't. Some made it just part of the recruiting process, put X amount of people in the pool. We'll call it good as long as we're looking at X amount of people. And so the business was operating in my era mostly as having diversity as part of rhythm of the business. And so they bring people in like me to do HR, and it becomes a part of the fiber of how we do business. But it took people like me to keep that fiber woven into everything that we did, because we didn't have separate entities that were stood up because of this, because of lack of diversity. But post George Floyd, there were 5,000 job postings on Indeed looking for chief diversity officers, because companies clearly had woven away from this whole notion of progress in this space. And there is outcry from people about the fact that we haven't made the kind of progress. And so as you're describing the, putting accountability back on, I do agree with that. It's their responsibility as business leaders to have this as part of how they do business. The challenge is that unless you're holding their feet to the fire in many regards, it's minimally being progressed. It looks like one of our listeners is enjoying this about. This is just kind of the issues we try to talk about every week, because we're trying to advance this conversation and advance progress in this whole space around people. How do we get people heard, seen, promoted, valued, all of those sorts of things? We've got like 2 minutes left in the show. I knew it was going to fly by. Do you have, do you have advice for other, particularly Black women who are in corporations, who want to be championed and navigated and need sponsorships? Do you have any words of wisdom for them on how they can become embraced inside of business?
Yeah, I do. I think part of my success has been luck. Part of my success has been the way I've been able to inspire people to respond to me in ways that are helpful to me, right? And so what does that look like at the end of the day? And I think it is this: if I believe nobody, I don't care what you look like, you need you need mentors and you need sponsors. Okay. And sometimes those people are in your organization and sometimes they're not. And you might say, well, how can that help me if they're not in the organization? Well, it may not be optimal, but it's better than zero, right? And every time you can develop one of those relationships, it is helping you move forward. I mean, that has been my experience, and you may not see it overnight, right? And you may not be aware of the benefit that is coming your way in the near term, but it matters. So that is the advice I would give.
Paula, look, thank you so much for coming on to the show this evening and having this conversation with me. Clearly, our listeners love this. It's fun to educate and give them some eye-opening experiences to understand how women like you have been successful in this space. I thank you from the bottom of my heart. I know you are a tough person to get scheduled on, and you have a busy schedule, so I respect that. Thank you for coming on with us this evening. To all of our listeners who joined us this evening, thank you so much for joining Heartbeat on these conversations. We will look forward. Joy will be back on air with me next week, and we'll see you next Wednesday. Thank you, Paula.
Thank you. Take care. Bye-bye.
That up in Saks, our favorite black businesses. Assuming I'm rooting for everybody that's black. Yeah. Yeah. Assuming I'm rooting for everybody that's black. Yo.